Greetings, everyone. Tim Anderson here, aka Renfail, and welcome to the latest episode of Mondays in MMORPGs. And today we're going to be talking about dev cycles and hype and a bunch of other stuff related to games in development. I'm joined by these two lovely gentlemen. First up, we've got Scribbles, aka Jesse. You do your
Yeah,
intro.
yeah, thank you. I am Jesse, aka Scribbles. I co-founded Ninja Loot Games back in 2019, and we're making the MMORPG Defend the Night. I'm just here to speak about my experiences with development.
Sweet. And we are joined by a guest host tonight, Lord Simurgh.
Well, that's really funny because my old name on Twitch used to be Lord Simurgh because Simurgh was taken. I couldn't do it. But my name is Phoenix. I go by Simurgh. I'm basically just a guy that likes to rant about video games and sometimes gets me in a little trouble, but not really that often. Just
Yeah, but
sometimes,
it's
occasionally.
it's good trouble. It's the right kind of trouble to have, I
Right?
think. Anyway, that's my opinion.
Yeah.
Um, Today we're going to be doing dev cycles. So this can go a lot of different ways. So we've seen, I know in the past, some of the past episodes, and also on your show as well, looking for more. We've touched on this, I think, in both places a little bit. But I think there's two different avenues to look at when it comes to dev cycles. You've got AAA studios who have their dev cycles, which are very much tied to milestones, and they've got weird. Different companies do it in different ways. You've got, for example, I look at Cyberpunk, which was announced like 9 years before it actually, I think almost 10 years before it was actually
Mm.
released. But then there was nothing for like 7 years, and so everyone's like, oh, it's vaporware. They announced it, and then nothing for 7 years. And then they hit the E3 circuit and started doing marketing and everything else. They have since said that they won't be doing that ever again because it bit them in the ass because they overhyped. They showed features that they ended up cutting from the game, which made people feel like they had been deceived, and it kind of did some harm to their company doing that way. But that's one way to do it. Then you have other companies who do everything out in the open, especially when we start talking about. Um, uh, there are some companies that do the documentation better than others. I've always liked Obsidian as a company, especially when they're doing like the Pillars of Eternity, the first Pillars of Eternity game when they did the Kickstarter, and then after the Kickstarter, they were just it was like development video after development video after development video, newsletter, 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 video. It was like they were constantly just bombarding you with all of the things they were doing and updating you on those dev cycles. And then on the other side, you've got companies that will not tell you anything for 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, sometimes more, and leave you wondering, is the game ever going to come out? And in some cases, that's okay if it's just an announced game. In other cases, if it's a crowdfunded game, that's an issue. Um, anyway, I've rambled a bit. I'd like to open up the floor to you guys and let you throw some ideas out there and opinions. I know we've got a lot of different stuff we can talk about between like New World, Ashes of Creation, so on and so forth. So let's go.
I'll let the host go, or the new host tonight. Sir, you want to hit this one, or
Man, I'm so nervous. I don't know.
it's
It's,
so nervous?
oh man, it's so much pressure, but sure, I'll try. No, no, man. I think development cycles. Yeah, it's a point of contention. I think for a lot of people in the community because, I think we've talked a lot over. We talked about the LFM podcast, right? And on that particular show, I think we've hit on it a couple times since you've been on there, Renfell, where we were talking about like the hype versus excitement factor, and then kind of like some of the delaying of the goalpost, movement of goalposts after, essentially like a game studio is kind of set. These are the current projections for things. I know you had some thoughts on that one too, but um, when I think we were talking about this right before we started, it was like, well, we got to start the show because this is good stuff, I think, to talk about. And one of the points was, currently Ashes of Creation, right? I created content around that game. Actually, I've created content around both the games you guys have worked on before too. Because, like if an MMORPG specifically or an RPG is just really, really resonates in terms of story or what their vision is, I get really interested and I'm curious and I follow it and I invest my time in it. And of course, anybody I think who invests their time in a game that's in development is probably very eager for when it launches, when it's going to release, when they're going to have an opportunity to see it or to test it or whatever. And so, when I think about these cycles of development, there's like the I think cultural shift that we probably could talk about too, or maybe even societal norms and expectations around like the gaming industry or gaming communities in general, where you know there's this almost expectation of like by the player or consumer base or whatever, where a game's in development, it's like we're ready to see it, but then there's this unfortunate trend. Now we could probably talk about how we think that gets there, where a large majority of the individuals, whether we could say it's to their own fault or not, or however we want to frame that, but there's this dynamic where the hype versus excitement element gets in place. You have this percentage of people, which who knows what that percentage number even looks like, where the individuals are super excited, they're stoked for the game, but they're probably more balanced in their approach to like maybe recognizing that um, that they have to temper their expectations and they can't get overhyped because they got to pay attention to what they're actually saying is going to be delivered. Then the people that get a little caught up in the hype and however that got there, and whatever percentage of the population that is, that gets really, really hyped about it, and then just for whatever reason get really frustrated or angry when it doesn't showcase on time because it's in development, or when they do showcase it, they don't see what they want, or what they showed isn't up to their expectation. So I mean, that to me seems to be like uh, both can be both a positive and negative, I think, for maybe developers or game studios that are trying to deliver a game, and also a negative or positive for community. I think if a community's balancing or really tempering their expectations, they're probably not going to be in for a whole lot of disappointment if things do get delayed or they don't see as much as they want when they want. Um, then on the flip side of that, I think there's almost like a toxic element to communities where when they don't get their way, and we could probably tie this into like Kickstarted games or ones that have been crowdfunded or funded through the player base or communities, where because and this isn't to everybody, but there's definitely this portion that do this, where because of the fact that I have funded your game or I'm backing it, or hell, even because I create content for you or around your game, I'm entitled to blank. And if I don't get it, then I'm going to write a stink piece on it. I'm going to post a stink video on it. I'm going to, tell my friends it's horrible. You should look into it. So you got the word of mouth, you got media, you got all these factors. And I feel like, when I reflect on development cycles, I try to be as fair as possible. And I try to be in a subjective life that is my own, as objective as I possibly can be. Because from my experience, it's tough to be a developer right now when you're trying to make, games for a lot of different reasons. Um, and it's also tough, I think, for the player base who's really looking for a really good game to
And,
kind of wait for one.
and I think there's a catch 22 in there too because
Mm-hmm.
there's two different. Okay, so on the one hand, let's look at a AAA studio for a minute. We've seen some AAA studios that have had some pretty significant crash and burns in
Yep.
the last few years. We can look at EA as an example as a publisher when the loot box scandal around Battlefront 2 hit. This has been what 3 or 4 years ago now. Might be even more than that. I don't really know the timelines. That was like a big thing. EA took a lot of heat from that. Um, BioWare launched Anthem, had a horrible launch. They took a lot of heat from that. You could even look at their Andromeda launch as well. They canceled the DLC for that game because of the reaction. You can look at the way Cyberpunk launched and the heat that CD Projekt Red has taken. Then also you have the aspect of the crunch within the industry where every every single day we're reading new articles. That's been an ongoing thing for like 3 or 4 years. And so we can look at the AAA studios and see how I almost feel like they've become a victim of their own success to the point where it's I'm of a divided opinion on this because I love working in game development, and for me, it's a dream job. And because it's a dream job, I don't ever feel like I am being overworked, even though I work 80 hours a week, because it's my passion, it's my dream. So I have a hard time when I look at people who work at AAA studios. This is a controversial opinion. When I
Mm.
see somebody, there's a great Twitter thread going on right now. I think it's called "Devs Get Paid," is the hashtag, and it's AAA people talking about how like they started getting paid this, now they're getting paid this, and you see people who have gone from making $35,000 a year, and in the course of 6 or 7 years, now they're making like $180,000 a year. I have a very hard time when I see somebody making $180,000 a year complaining about having to work crunch or having to work extra hours. Obviously, if it's continual, that's a problem with the development cycle and the management, not necessarily the problem. It's not the fault of the employee. But I also think that when you're working a job that you love and you're passionate about, everyone should be expected to work a little bit of overtime now and again because there are circumstances. But when you look at the AAA industry as a whole, we've got all of these things that are going on that can affect that dev cycle. And CD Projekt Red has come out and talked openly about how, and whether or not it's empty words or not, and they've talked about how they're not going to do it the way they've done it up to this point because they said they crashed and burned so hard with CD Projekt Red, too much crunch, buggy release, all these problems, features that didn't get into the game but they were promoted at E3. They want to completely change their development cycles moving forward. So they're going to be moving away theoretically from the way they've done in the past, where they have these, you know, huge chunks, and they're going to break it up into more agile teams across more studios and theoretically work towards games that launch when they're ready as opposed to games that launch on a specific date because the investors have to make a return on their investment by this amount of time because they have a contract in place, and if they don't, there's lawsuits and all this other stuff. I think that that's a great way to go from the, if we could do it that way. On the other side, from the independent standpoint, we have a lot of volunteer studios who are working in the MMORPG space and the multiplayer space and creating games in their spare time. And because of that, they have a limited amount of time. They're not working with multi-million dollar budgets. They're working with
Mhm.
theoretically no budget because they're bootstrapping. Or if they
You-
have, because I can speak from both perspectives. I had a company where we bootstrapped for a couple of years and then we got into investment money, which allowed us a lot more flexibility. And even though we did investors in the right way, in my opinion, in that they had zero input into the creative decisions or the business decisions of the company, they were just sharing in the financial aspect of the company. There still is paperwork in place, and I can't
right.
speak to the dates, but there is paperwork in place that it says if X and Y doesn't happen by X and Y, there are consequences for those things not happening. So you still have deadlines and commitments. Um, when you get involved with investors and publishers. But when you're fully just bootstrapping, the sky's the limit. But that leads to that catch 22 we were talking about the other week and looking for more, which is the moving goalposts
Yeah.
with crowdfunding companies, where it's like, oh well, these people are happily giving us money, so why should we set dates? Let's just go ahead and do what these people are asking, and because we'll get more money if we do it that way, and then we can kind of push these things off later on down the pipeline. Star Citizen is, I think, is one of the best examples of that because we're coming up on 10 years and the game is still nowhere near a released product, and now it's split into like, I think at one point they had split it into three different games. It was going to be the multiplayer, the MMORPG, the single player, and then the shooter aspect, the FPS. And they have since, I guess, combined the FPS and the MMORPG aspect of it into one, and then the single player is the other. But that's I think, a good example of a game which people say that's a AAA studio. I don't think it is. It's an independent studio.
Mhm.
It's a brand new studio that just spun up out of a Kickstarter, and yet their goalposts and their dev cycles have completely just skewed out of whack because
Right.
people are willing to just throw money at them for the ideas, and that's good and bad.
Scary. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we can kind of um, sum up what the quickest MMORPG that's out there was 2.5 years with Final Fantasy 11. So that's kind of like your starting goalpost, right? That's your starting point where what you can expect a company uh, such as a large company like those guys. But the thing is, I'm drawing a blank on the name.
Square
Um,
Enix.
Square Enix, yeah,
Linux,
Square
yeah.
Enix. Yeah. So what you got to do is you got to, that's a starting point. And right now, what is Robert Industries? They're at what, 9 years,
Yeah,
almost 10 years.
2012 will be 10 years, so they're
10
at
years.
9 years right now.
And you got to find out what the difference between both of those were. With Final Fantasy, they had probably a lot of those assets ready to roll uh, in their
Hmm.
development cycle. They even might have been developing it uh, before they even released it. So I mean, there could be a space there that's not 2.5 years. Maybe it's more like 3 years, but that wasn't public knowledge. The thing is you have to. Uh, if you have all the assets and everything's available to you and you have the resources, you could pull off something like 2.5 years if your scope is small. Uh, like Final Fantasy 11 was taking a lot of I guess there's a lot of devs that were playing EverQuest at the time, so they had a lot of back end to go off of. Something like Star Citizen is doing something completely different outside the box, so it's going to take a lot longer
And the
to
scope of it,
make that
yeah.
just
Yeah.
just huge. It keeps on growing too. Um, so so you got to hit it up with the complexities, like something like if Chronicles of Lyria was ever going to drop, I would think that would probably be the 10-year mark too that you start worrying about. Um, that is this ever going to happen? But I think for me, what do you guys think? I think for me, 7 years is like the time where, hey, dude, you gotta shit or get off the pot. That's for
S-
me. It's not really a game anymore. I
Mm.
mean, you might as well release something and then have patches because it's
Yes.
always going to be a game. It's MMORPG. It's always going to advance.
So
So
this
you might as well
is
just stick your patches in and go from there. Anything after 7 years, man, hey,
this
I,
is an item.
for me, it's like, ooh,
Yeah,
too
this
much.
was an item of contention between myself and other people when I was
Mm,
involved with Stormhaven Studios because my brother and I were very much on the fence of we wanted to get it out earlier than and there was pushback from the programming perspective of no, we need to do this, and this. And my perspective has always been, as a project manager for many, many years, especially with a product that you can patch after the fact, there is something to be said for the product is good enough, get it out the door, patch
Mm.
it. Now, the terrifying aspect for some people of that is that if it's not good enough when you put it out, then you can get savaged in the current industry, and that
Yeah.
that
potentially
yeah.
potentially can ruin your game. But I would also like to point out that you have companies like No Man's, I don't know the company behind No Man's Sky, but that's a good example of a game that launched. It had they faltered when they launched. It didn't live up to the hype. There was a lot of, they got accused of false advertisement, etc. They took
Mm,
the criticisms and feedback to heart. They went basically dark for like I don't even know the timeline, 8 months to a year or whatever it was, and they just patch. And by the end of that first year, they were back in the spotlight with a game that was now getting rave reviews because they took that to heart and fixed it and fixed all those problems. That's not to say that every company can recover from a
mm,
stumble like that, because if you do have a shitty enough launch and you don't have the financials that you need to be able to keep your team moving forward to patch the game in the first place,
mm,
that can be detrimental. But at some point, every product, doesn't matter what product you're talking about, there is a point of no return on every single product. It's never going to be perfect, never.
mm.
But there comes a point with every single product where you just have to pull the ripcord and just shove that baby out of the plane and see what it's going to do. And
Yeah.
you can course correct a little bit if necessary, but yeah, I can definitely say I did not want Cycle of Seaman to turn into a 9 year project. I was very much
So
with a five to
yeah,
six year product.
there's also things that you have to think about too. Is was this funded? Was it crowdfunded? Was it privately funded? Because there's going to be more blowback for a lot of people funding a game. You're gonna just gonna you just like if it's crowdfunded, and you have 1,000 people, supporting your game, you're gonna have to put something out. Your scope, whatever your scope is, it was too much at 7 years. That's it. I mean, that's what you get. Now you have to say, hey, everybody, this is what's going to happen. But right after this, the next year, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this. It's not a bad thing for me. Everybody understands that sort of aspect when you're talking about MMORPGs. It's been happening for many years.
Well, because the other
Um,
flip side of that is you can wait too long.
mm,
Um, like as an example, when I first started Saga, it was 2014, right? That was right when Pantheon was about a year ahead of us on that front.
Mhm.
And at the time, subscription games were all in vogue. It was coming back. It was, yeah, it's going to be subscriptions. Everybody's loving the idea of going back to subscription-based games. Fast forward, here we are in 2021, 7 years later. No one wants to pay subscriptions anymore because we have all of this competition that's come out in the last 7 years in terms of Hulu, Netflix, Amazon, Peacock, other games, Xbox Live, PlayStation Plus, PlayStation Next, all these different things that are vying for our attention and our money, and all of these subscriptions and apps and all this other stuff. Society has changed. We've had a pandemic. Monetization has changed because
Mhm.
of all these streaming services. If you don't put your game out within a very finite window, you run the risk of your entire mechanic and design philosophy, your entire monetization philosophy being outdated by the time you actually get it to release, unless you're willing to change it along the way, which runs the risk of pissing off all of the people who backed your game for the original vision in the first place.
Plus, it's kind of ridiculous. Let's have to wait 7 years for a game. I mean, you hype up a game, you say, "Hey, this is what's going to happen," and then, holy shit, 7 years later, it still hasn't happened. Come on, man.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
yeah, that's one of those things where if your scope is you got to think about this when you're hyping the game. This
Yep.
is what it's going to be. If you got to complete that at some reasonable amount of time. If not, you're just bad. You're just bad. You're
Yeah.
just bad at whatever you do. You're bad at the foresight and development of the game.
How long has
Yeah.
Ashes been going?
Yeah, I was gonna
Simmer.
say too, because what Scribbles was talking about with like, how long, I've, and I'll totally tie into Ashes here in a minute, but I probably would say early in following Ashes along with other games. Just, I mean, watching like the Elder Scrolls when it was in development, like watching Star Wars: The Old Republic when it was in development, Terra, Rift. I mean, there's a bunch of other ones like Saga of Leucemia, right? Defend the Night. I mean, like these are games that when I watch it, like I've learned through my experience, I think, as a creator and just as someone who plays video games, specifically MMORPGs, and in watching them develop over the years, I think I've tempered my expectations and had a more realistic approach to like, how long do I think realistically an MMORPG should take to come to, be created and posted out there and like people be able to try it, play it, etc. Whether we're talking like a early iteration of it versus like the end product. And I have always looked at it and based on all of my own experience, my working belief, just belief and thought is that 5 years is a pretty good snapshot for like I look at that as like the low end too. High end, 7, it depends years in there, I think is a pretty good
Because
window. It could be longer, but
didn't ESO
depends
take
on
9 years? Because they had to revamp it in the middle of it.
yes. And what I was gonna say was I think also the window and this ties into a few other things which I'm gonna totally I'll tie in here. But like is it a AAA studio or in regard to like there's a lot of things that go into well when a game's being made you were talking about like um uh like Star Citizen for example, right? Star Citizen, like last I mean as far as I know, isn't there one guy at the top of that whole
Yeah,
thing? It's not a
Chris
board, right?
Roberts.
And that's why I wouldn't consider a AAA studio because I don't see corporations running the thing. I don't see a big entity like Blizzard, Activision, or these massive studios that have been around in the game for so long running and dictating things based on A, B, and C or whatever
It's
their pieces
basically him
are.
and his brother and his wife, I think, are the three
Yeah,
who really run the show.
yeah. So when you look at like the window, I've always said 5 years as I just believe that that's like kind of a bare minimum for me based on kind of an average in my mind of seeing other games from different backgrounds. And I look at that and I'm like, 5 years is a pretty solid low end to the average for me. Because I've seen, like you said, Elder Scrolls Online, they had to rework some stuff, and it took years. Took a lot of years, and that's a AAA studio. It's like Bethesda, ZeniMax, man. Like, so for me, 5 years, if a game comes into alpha beta in 5 years, I'm going, okay, they've hit the marker. I feel like, um, but I think 5 years for me is like either release, and that's like being generous in my mind. Um, Again, just on my belief, I'd say 5 years is pretty generous. 7, 8 is pretty reasonable to me,
I
but
was just looking
I
at
think yeah,
Star Wars: The Old Republic it was around 6 years,
yeah,
just over 5 years from
yeah.
announcement to release, 200 million, over 200 million is what it says.
Hmm.
So I think that 5 6 years. That's the number that I always threw around on the Saga website was
Right on.
5 to 6 years.
Hmm.
I felt like that's a reasonable amount of time. Some studios do it quicker, some take longer, but I think
Hmm.
the average is in that 5 to 6 year ballpark. I don't. I'm hard pressed to be sympathetic. It's a weird thing for me because it's like if a AAA studio says we want to, they're 6 years in and like we need another few more years because it's not working the way we want it to. We want to tweak it. They've got the money to do that, right? They can,
Hmm.
behind closed doors, throw another 60
They
million
could.
at it and make it right. But with an indie studio, you don't have that luxury, and I don't think it's. This is me being, just me for a minute of opinion.
Yeah.
I don't think it's necessarily fair for an independent developer to say that same thing because A, you don't have millions of dollars at your disposal from in most independent studios cases, especially if you're a crowdfunded game. People crowdfunded a very specific thing, and your dev cycles should reflect that scope. If you do anything outside of that scope, I feel like you're betraying the people who gave you money to develop your game because you said we're going to build this and now you want to go off and add these 7 things because we were brainstorming and we had some really cool ideas that would be really post launch, buddy. That's a patch
Right.
1.0 DLC first expansion, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Danger of scope creep, as they call it, right?
Feature creep. That's some
Yeah,
scary
Yeah.
shit.
but Ashes. Okay, so it depends on like the timeline you want to go with here. I found out about it from an old army buddy at the end of 2016. It was like December, November, December, somewhere in there. And the reason that was even something people found out about is because it was kind of leaked on accident because they had a website and someone found this website. And so there was like, wait, there's a website for some game. And then the word kind of spreads. And so, then they were like, okay, I guess we're just going to go with it. So it was about 6 months later, around the, May, June timeframe or something, when their 2017
May.
Kickstarter launched. Yeah. And so for 6 months, they started going, okay, we're going to kind of talk about it, you know, share some information around it, whatever. But the big push was the Kickstarter. Now, I don't know how much they actually had worked on at this point because their Kickstarter is, I don't view it the same way. I view it same but different. And the reason is because they're not essentially like looking for a majority of funding to fund their game. It was supplemental to funding the game to get additional things included and to get people engaged. And I think through my experience now, I know I've continued to talk to people who are of a very different opinion that it is, you know, the idea of kickstarted game. I think it's kind of just, I think it's an interesting perspective because I think so many times people view that as like we are funding your game like solely, and even if that's not the case, people still I think are kind of that's in their mind what's kind of going on. And so I've seen it with Ashes because people kind of come to it and they make comparisons to, and I think the scope creep or feature creep idea tying into like talks around Star Citizen, which is one of the references people who are very, you know, very hesitant around Ashes. I think they see similarities in their mind related to that kind of maybe like delaying but continuing to get funding in some regard. So I get it and I can totally see that. But I think the difference is it is the culture of the people that are running the gig, and you're talking about the people at the top and like what they're choosing to do, what those choices are. Ashes is coming up on, if we want to go back to when it was found out, end of this year would be 5 years.
Yeah, because I'm thinking, because from what I know about Shroud of the
Mhm.
Avatar, it was roughly a year and a half, 2 years to develop the prototype that went to
Mhm.
Kickstarter, and it sounds to me like maybe it was around the same. If you conservatively say
Yeah.
year and a half for their prototype, so they went live in 2000
Yeah.
May of 2017. So if they started their development at the beginning of 2016,
Right.
even if you add that, yeah, we're 5.5 years into Ashes, and I feel like, and again, I'm not a huge because I'm not a big PvPer. I've talked about that on your show,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
but I am intimate. I'm familiar with enough with the game because it's being developed alongside, all these other
Mhm.
indie games. So you pay attention to that when you're in the development space.
Mhm.
Um, and I feel like they're within a year or two from launching. So if we said conservatively, let's say next year is the launch. That would put them
Mhm.
within the 7 year bracket, like the 6 to 7 year bracket, which is a fair amount of time.
Pretty fair. Yeah.
New World. I'm gonna go Google this real quick.
Yeah. I was curious about that. I was wondering how long they've actually technically kind of been in development now. Because I don't follow that one as much.
I
It's
don't
just
either. I'm
we've
just
kind
kind
of
of
talked
curious.
about it before. I kind of had the similar mind. I did play in the alpha some, and it just didn't thematically. It just didn't. Even though they've implemented, I think, more fantasy elements now than I remember having been at that time. Um, it's still just thematically, it's got more of this like settlers sort of coming to America back in the day, it's pioneers vibe, and it doesn't mean it's bad. It just isn't my idea of my preference for the kind of game I play.
So it was announced in September 2016 at TwitchCon. So they
Uh,
announced it in 2016, and whether or not they had already done any work on it,
mm,
I don't know. I would have to dig into that more. Let's assume for a minute that they had about a year's worth of work to show some sort of a working prototype when they announced it,
mm,
or some sort of a trailer. So you could assume 2000. Let's just say September 2016. Let's say they kick things off at the beginning of 2016. They're in the same boat, and I know from the trailer today that they did announce their final release date, which is August 31st of this year. So they're going to be
whoa.
releasing, and even if we tack on an extra year for a prototype, they're within a 5 to 7 year window for New World, which puts them into that average time frame for an MMORPG from start to finish. Um, and I also look at that, and I know a lot of people like to shit all over Smedley,
Mm,
because of things that happened with Sony games under his tenure, but he's also an individual who has, you know, 25, 30 years of industry experience as a project manager. And even though not all of his decisions were necessarily good decisions, no one makes good decisions all the time in their life. We all make shitty decisions from time to time, and no one should be crucified because they made a bad decision or two. So I think if you can strip away the toxicity related to, oh, he screwed up Matrix Online, he fucked Star Wars Galaxies into the grave, like, take that away, Amazon would not have hired him if they
yeah.
didn't think he was capable of doing what he's doing. And he's obviously gotten a game for them that's going to be releasing this year. Whether or not successful remains to be seen, but it is a MMORPG that's being produced within a 6 year window,
Yeah.
7 year window. So that seems like a relatively normal time frame. And
I think so.
I kind of feel like as long as Ashes doesn't allow feature creep to get in the way, that they're on time to make that sort of a launch possible as well within
Yeah.
like a 7 year window.
Yeah. I think the thing that for me I've come to appreciate about them, which is probably a bigger piece of why I have a lot of faith in them, isn't the backer perspective or that I'm creating content for them as much. It's that I've been along for the ride, and they come back to, this isn't even trying to sell it. This is just the reason that I'm like, yo, I got their back on this, because the things from my perspective that I always find are problems when a game's developing, and this happened with the Elder Scrolls Online, and it chapped my ass. It bothered me so much. Was I was doing those tests with everybody else in the closed betas, man. You couldn't stream it, you could showcase it, but you were playing it. And there were a lot of problems, and you're going, yo, maybe they ought to like give it a little longer. They didn't. They pushed it out at that damn date, come hell or high water, and the game, in my opinion, has been plagued by the same problems that weren't ironed out in development. And now you're talking about your foundation for the game that has continued to have more and more built upon it over all these years, 7 years now. And you go into Cyrodiil, it's a laggy mess. It's continued to be a laggy mess.
Correct me if I'm wrong too, because I didn't play that game at launch. Didn't that
Yeah,
one also launch as a subscription-based game and then went free to play like
it
a year and a
did.
half into it?
It was like, yeah, it was like 6 months to maybe it's a year and a half in. It was significant. It was definitely within the first two. It was probably a year and a half or less for sure. I would say maybe it was around a year. I'd have to look at it, but they were about a year roughly or so. And then they went free to play, but the subscription model changed to include other things like, nothing super significant. Most of the crafting bag, and you get included DLCs and stuff like that.
Right.
I think it's like a small amount of experience gain or whatever, um, but that was the thing. Is like that was like that was like one of the biggest experiences for me following game development. And this is a AAA studio. They launch it and it's been plague ridden since the beginning. And so the thing, bringing it back to Ashes and why this is the biggest reason that I'm a proponent. It's not because I've been a creator for them, and it's not because I backed it so high. I did do those things, but that's not the reason why. The reason why is because of the fact that when they've had issues with similar items like functionality of like server load or things like then you've seen this be an issue and they've talked about it being an issue, or I've been able to talk about these experience from some testing that they're like, hey, you can talk about it. The concerns have been like fluidity in combat. These are big ones for me. Any MMORPG, fluidity in combat and server performance. These are the big ones, really big ones, right? Immersion and all that's really important, but these are like the very foundational pieces for me. And when we've seen concerns and issues around these specific pieces, the 1 year that essentially from when they did the apocalypse thing, which was testing stuff, people are like, "Oh, this isn't for that," and I'm like, just saying, like it, love it, or hate it, I saw all of those things being implemented in the MMO that they've been working on in that test environment. So I was like, I didn't, there were things I wasn't happy about. I shared my criticisms and everything, but the thing was, it was this foundation of things being fluid and working and combat, everything vibing and not being a laggy hot mess.
Mhm.
And they were like, I think it was Jeff that actually said in some of the live streams or whatever, and he said something like, about
Yeah.
combat, which was if it's like we're going to take the time it takes to make sure combat's done right, because if we don't do it right, it's going to be a lot harder for us to fix those mistakes later. And I was like,
Right.
okay, thank you, man. And he says like other frustrations you might have because I hear those things. And I'm like, wish that damn Bethesda ZeniMax would have listened to people complaining about stuff like this back in the day. So just one of those pieces, I look for when I talk about like what gives me faith in a game in development. It's they're not
Yeah.
pushing it out too quickly. They're willing to fix those types of things.
Yeah, but you got sometimes you have to treat it like your brother-in-law that is sleeping on your couch for like too long, and you're like, hey, so he's going to get a job interview every now and then, but he doesn't actually leave, to get a job. So you got, there's certain period of time where you have to say, man, you have to get a job and you have to
Yep.
move out, and
Yep.
you do have to provide
Mm-hmm.
for your family or buy your
Yep.
own food, god damn it. But yeah, there's that time where you have to say sink
Yep.
or swim.
Can't
I
go
know it's
too
hard
long.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, because
Can't wait too long.
I can also look at it from the other side of the table as well and say that it
Mm-hmm.
is important to listen to the feedback of your backers and your testers. But, but,
Sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, this is the key. Not everything people suggest. This goes back to something you talked about earlier, Simmer, as well, which is
Yep.
um, sometimes your whales, not just your whales, sometimes it's even the people who've just given as little as $40.
Very true.
People feel a sense of entitlement
Yep.
because they backed your game. And so
Yep.
it's like you didn't really back it. You pre-ordered, in my opinion, this is what we were doing the thing.
Yep.
You pre-ordered it. You didn't back an idea. You pre-ordered a product, and
Yep.
it was already outlined what that product was going to be. And there is some flexibility in that product being developed, but for the most part, that design has been written in stone for years. And there has to be some flexibility because not everything you write down on paper is going to be you're not going to be capable of programming that into your game with the limited budget or the limited amount of people that you have. So you have to cut some things back and figure out creative ways to work around some things. But it's like, as an example, this is going to be a really exaggerated example, but I just want to throw this out there for the sake of argument. It's like your game saying that we're going to have um, 8-man groups, right? And then you get 15% of your community who start giving you feedback. Well, we don't like 8-man groups. We want 4-man groups. And they happen to be a vocal group. So they go on the forums and they're in Discord and they make it seem like it's this big deal, that there's a lot of people who actually want 4. And it's really, no, it's like 15% of the community.
Yep.
And because you already knew when you backed the game that we were making 8-man party systems, we're not going to be changing that. Now, what we might change are things like how does skill gain work? Like, is it based on successful use of your skills, or is it just based on the actual use of abilities, whether it's successful or not? That is something that we can look at adjusting because that's the balance and flow of that skill progression. That's definitely something. And then, you were talking about the combat flow. I think there's a lot to be said for animations, spell effects, things of that nature that can make combat feel better without actually changing how combat is actually working. Like, it's still the same dice rolls, it's still the same mechanics and everything else, but just changing the speed of an animation or how quickly a character runs or that movement speed, that can all change the entire feel of combat without actually changing the combat, if that makes sense. So I think it is important to listen to people to some degree, but also at sometimes it's like, no, man, this is a core design feature. We're not changing that just because you want it. Especially, I think the dangerous ones are the whales because they feel like because they gave you X amount of money that they have somehow the right to dictate how something is done, and it's like that's not the way this works.
You also get though, it's like something else I've noticed, which just I'm like, what in the hell is this? Like, because I'll see people who back a game, like you talked about, they crowdfunded or otherwise or whatever, and then it's like you'll see them kind of almost talking like they think they're like a board member or something, like they, you know what I'm talking about? You're just like, what are you thinking, man? What makes you think that you got that level of a say?
Well, I can speak from my
Holy hell.
perspective. Even our investors didn't have that kind of say. So if I wasn't going to listen to an investor
You're
tell me,
right.
I'm not going to
You're
listen
like,
to a backer.
you're like, come on, homie. So I gotta ask you guys, man. Like, I want to talk about that because development cycles, right?
Yeah, it's tough.
This one's Ashes of Creation because okay, so they had the March. They were gonna do the thing in March, right? Which was 1 week and everything, and people were really sour about it, and I totally get it. I think they're like moving the goalpost because like you just really need to do that. And then there's like Scribbles like you kind of hit on too, which is like we could just relate this to any game. Like at some point you got to kind of get it. You just got to step up and you got to do it and roll the dice and put it out there. And I think that's an important I think that's the two important pieces to like look at. That I think it's really tough to. It feels like if I'm not a developer, but I feel like if I was a developer, this has got to be like a dilemma, man,
Oh
because
yeah.
I view this with what's going on with Ashes because they've had to push it back, and from like a subjective and objective perspective, I could both say that I would agree with it. I think it's smart, but I also think at a certain point, like they're definitely gonna have to like showcase. They're definitely gonna have to showcase it. And I think that from my perspective, it's gonna be like they've reestablished timelines, right? So it was gonna be a week in March, right, which has already passed clearly, and then it was going to be end of May, or it was like sometime through May through June or something like that, and then they kind of like pushed it a bit based on some things they had to fix related to like like Unreal Engine and some stuff they talked about, and they were like pretty happy with it, squared away, showcased some stuff on a recent stream. It was like, damn, that's looking good. Also, what is all this extra stuff? They added more, they're putting more into it. I think that there's definitely going to be quite a bit of content there, way more than I expected there to be for what they first were going to put out there, which I think is good.
Yeah.
However, they did push the goalposts, and they pushed the one from March to May, and it was going to be a week in May and then the whole month of June, right? And then the creative director letter, or not creative director's letter, but just an announcement came out from Steven Sharif, and they, realizing, whoa, we got a bunch of things going on here. We want to make sure that these castle sieges that we're going to have in are solid, right? We want to make sure some of these things that we put in that are going to be there that we talked about are solid. More QA testing. Also, there's also the fact that Blizzard moved their classic, The Burning Crusade. Oh man, you guys. Oh, there's something about this I want to talk about so bad. I'm not gonna leave it out because it doesn't belong here. But I'm gonna be ranting about this week. Let's just put it that way. So maybe we come back to it sometime. But the Burning Crusade, classic servers, they're launching it on June 1st, perfectly in alignment with Ashes of Creation's 1 month, June 1st to 30th. And then of course ESO's already got theirs. That's let it be happening then. So from that perspective of being a game studio in development that's about to showcase your game, as an MMORPG for the first time and let people play it and stream it, like I totally get that. Like that probably would be better to time it a little differently. So they
Yeah.
shifted stuff around.
Yeah, so I definitely wouldn't want to go up against a giant like Blizzard
No,
when you're in the same genre. So
yeah.
yeah, I think that's from a sales. If they're trying to sell something, are they trying to sell something? Because I'm not
Yes,
aware.
it's
I think it's yes, but I also think it's
Yeah,
the fact that they're probably going to rely on some really large creators who are going to showcase the
yeah,
game, who are going to then also be in a position to pick, do I play
yeah,
the launch of this
yeah.
thing that I primarily cover, or
Hmm.
do I come over here and test this out? And I think that would be a tricky scenario too.
So yeah,
So,
if they're selling something, yeah, yeah,
I see it as a purely
I
as they're definitely selling something because the
mm,
announcement that came last week, I think it was Wednesday or whenever it was hey, we're now offering this adventure pack that gets you into Alpha
yeah,
1. It's $500
open it up.
where anybody who buys in can get in. So from my perspective, yes,
Yeah,
it's absolutely it's a showcase, but
yep,
also drive
so,
sales.
yep,
So
two
from
part.
a marketing standpoint, yeah, I can understand moving that
Mm,
a little bit around so that you can make sure that your people are going to be there for you instead of off busy trying to get to max level, in Burning Crusade or do an ESO or whatever the case may be. Um,
so, what are your thoughts on this? So we talked about they moved it from March to May for the 1 week no NDA, right?
um,
Then, and that was like a week in May, so it was going to be the 14th coming up through the 21st, and then June 1st through the 30th. So because of some of the things that we talked about just now and a few other reasons, they're like, okay, so we're going to have intermittent spot testing, right? They're going to have this weekend coming up from the 14th, 15th, 16th that people are going to be able to jump in, play, but still under NDA, and it's going to have all those people. And then they're going to do more testing with all those people between now and like July 9th. Then July 9th, 10th, 11th, so through another 3-day weekend, is going to be a full preview, full wipe, no NDA. And then the goalpost is July 14th through August 13th. And then that actually aligns really well because I didn't think about how well that probably aligns when you talked about New World launch. What is it? August
August
30th,
31st.
31st, which means that isn't going to be happening then too. Which is if anything changes. I mean, otherwise that time wise is pretty good. But I also am going. I'm also thinking to myself like I think these really have to happen.
Well, yeah, because they're pushing it back from March. They're pushing it back 4 or 5 months. I
Yeah.
mean, pushing something back a month or two is understandable.
Mm-hmm.
Pushing something back 5 months starts to, in my
Yeah.
mind, I start asking a lot of questions about, the if you're okay to push it back 5 months, then why even worry about it in the first place? Because 5 months. I look at the burn rate. What's your burn rate for 5 months? You know what I mean? Like if you're burning through $40,000, $50,000 a month for 5 months, how badly do you need the money? Because if you don't need the money that badly, then pushing it back 5 months shows me that the they don't necessarily need the cash per se, if that makes sense. So from a marketing standpoint,
Mhm.
I look at it. I try to analyze it from that angle because if you need the money, then you're like, no, we got to do it now. It's got to be out. And if they don't need the money, that's not necessarily a bad thing for the game, for the quality of things, because it gives them
Hmm.
more time. But it's also that thing of where I suppose though, if I've bought the $500 tier that they just announced, and I'm able to play with an NDA in place, I'm not going to give a shit because I'm still getting to play the game in
Mhm.
those open testing sessions. So I'm still able to get my hands
Check it
on the
out.
product. And Scribbles and I have talked a lot about this in our previous episodes here of if you're going to do early access, there has to be something that I can touch, log into,
Yeah.
physically get my hands on. This is one of the continual criticisms I have
Yeah.
about.
I'm not going to charge somebody grand or $500 if they can't get in my game. What are you, crazy? That's a lot
Yeah.
of freaking money for a lot of people, man.
Yep.
Don't do that to people. I just don't like it. So yeah, if you can't play that game, dude, it's just not right. Sorry, it's just how I feel. But
I've previously ranted about the $1,000 VIPs for Pantheon, which I think is ridiculous. And I can't remember if it was looking for more this show. Maybe it was with Ash and Phoenix the other night when we were talking with him, Scribbles. But I was talking about how, for me, I only ever did like $40. Like the minimum buy-in with Saga Blasphemia, you were in the door. But I also did that because we weren't trying to. I was just doing it differently. You know what I mean? I wanted everybody who wanted to
oh
test it out
yeah,
to be able to get in at a
I totally get it
base.
because you kind of gate the content so you don't have this fluctuation of everybody just overloading your servers. It's a great way to do it. But man, dude, get the people in. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, I looked. I'm not gonna lie. You've gotten me hyped for Ashes Simmer, even though I'm not a PvPer. I like.
Yeah.
I hear you, and when you do the podcast with the other people that you have on your show for the Ashes, I've watched a few of those now. I'm intrigued by the game way more than I was 6 months ago, and I'm
Yeah,
definitely intrigued.
the node system gets me. I every time I'm like, how is this going to work? I kind of get in my head, and I'm always for that different way of doing things. So
But
it's definitely got my attention.
I'm not going to spend
Mhm.
$500 to join an alpha.
Yeah.
I will spend $200 on a Kickstarter for Ouroboros, but that's a slightly,
Yes.
I'm not gonna lie. If they had a $200 to $250 tier to get me into alpha for Ashes, I would totally do it. But
Yeah.
$500 for me is like $250 too much. Like there is
Yeah.
this because here's the thing for me.
Mhm.
I know what the lifetime value of an MMORPG customer is, and it's between $225 and $250.
Mhm.
So that's the average amount that the average player is going to spend over the lifetime of the time that they play a game. That's the average. We're not talking whales. We're not talking the people who only play a game for a month. It's the average individual. So knowing that number, there's no way in fucking hell that I want to spend more than $250 to get into an alpha of a game because I know that that's beyond anything beyond $250 is beyond what the average lifetime player is ever going to pay to get into that product. So I don't feel compelled to want to spend more than that. And of course the argument is that well you get to get in, you get to help shape. I understand all of that. You get to be part of the early access community, you get to be part of the those are all good things. Everybody's going to have their different, this game is right for me. I'm willing to do it. I did it for Vanguard. I bought two collector's editions, which was like $700 or something like that back in the day for my partner and I. I did it for Vanguard because I was in love with that game and I was happy to spend $700 when I went to the first Star Wars celebration in Denver, Colorado, because I happen to live in Colorado when it went down in '99 or whenever it was. I blew $700 on Legos at the store, and I bought like $600. I spent over $1,000 at the Star Wars Celebration on books and Legos and just swag because I was like, I'm getting everything autographed by the actors. I'm just going crazy. So there have been times in my life when I have done that, but with MMORPGs, it's possibly because I've gotten jaded the older I've gotten. But
Yeah, we're all jaded guys, or at least I am. And
right. It's like that $250 thing for me, that's like the limit that I'm willing to spend. And I can't say that I've spent that kind of money on a game in a long time. Most games, I'll pre-order AAA games all the time, $60. I have no problems. I do get a little irked when like 6 months down the road it comes up on PS Now for free, and I'm like, motherfucker, I just, like it's like Spider-Man. I spent $60 on it, and then like 4 months later it was for free, and I was like, oh, you got to be kidding me. But for the most part, I always feel like I get my money's worth. But that $500 or $1,000, that does rub me a little bit the wrong way.
And there's a lot of people waiting until later to check out Ashes that are totally hanging out for the similar reasons. I know that.
I'm totally for it. I think it's
Yeah.
great potential and everything. I wish them the best. I just can't get in the ride right yet. Maybe
I don't
after I see more progress. So
I don't
yeah.
think there's anything wrong with having those tiers, like having $500 tiers,
Mhm.
$700, but it's the tying of the alpha access for me. Because I'll be honest, if I'm giving you $500 or $1,000 and you start changing goalposts on me, and you start, telling me that, and I'm not criticizing Ashes with this.
Right.
I'm
Just in general.
criticizing many games who do this because
Mm,
that
it's
dev
happened a lot.
cycle, I could really. I know I've ranted about them in the past, but I will mention them in the same breath again because Pantheon's done this a bunch too. They have shifted that alpha goal. It's like 3 years running now, I think, that alpha goalpost has just changed over and over and over and over again. And I'm like, if I've given you $1,000 and you promised me something for that $1,000, then by God, you better deliver that thing you promised me by the date you promised me, because if you didn't, I'm going to the state attorney general. But that's the kind of person I am. Like, I don't mess around when it comes to, if I've paid you for something and I don't get what I'm promised, there are rules and regulations in place. And we've briefly touched on that before because there's not a lot of rules and regulations about crowdfunding yet.
Yeah,
Um,
huh?
so it's a little harder with those things. But um,
Man,
it's a lot of money. $500 is still a lot of money. But
it
I'm not
is.
gonna lie, that world boss video with that massive dragon got me salivating a little bit. Like, I watched that for Ashes and I was like, God damn, that
Yeah,
looks pretty good. Like,
I
I'm
know.
not gonna lie, it looks
I
good.
wasn't expecting that. I was like, yo, you guys, what? You guys are putting these in for okay?
But that also spins me back
Shocking.
around. I know because the New World trailer dropped. I think it was. Well, we're pre-recording this episode, so this is gonna air way later. We were recording this on May 11th, and I'm pretty sure the New World trailer dropped today. It might have been yesterday, but I know nothing about that game, and I watched the trailer and I've kind of went, hmm, like I didn't think that's what the story was about. Like, I thought it was like European settlers coming to America, and it turns out that it's kind of that, but it's a new world that's not. It's something completely different. It's like a fantasy world that has inhabitants, and there's dark magic going on, and they're corrupted, and they're fighting back against the settlers, and so it is sort of, it's inspired by the European settlement of, you know, Americas, but it's got a mystical take on things. And the trailer was interesting from a story perspective. I watched a because IGN also did a dungeon preview today, and I watched the
Saw that.
dungeon preview, and I was like, it looks like every dungeon run I've ever done and every single MMORPG I've ever played. There's nothing there that makes me feel inspired enough to want to go pre-order this game. Like, um, uh, the lighting's cool. They were talking about the
Yeah.
lumberyard engine, and I'm like, okay, yeah,
Tree's
awesome.
sick though. I saw that tree just now. I'm watching it. Yeah, that tree's pretty sick.
The trailer,
The tree in the trailer.
yeah, with
Yeah.
the thing they pull out of the,
Glowing. Yeah.
yeah. So I'm
Is
intrigued.
that CGI? It's all CGI.
Yeah, that's CGI. It
Yeah.
looks like.
Uh,
See, I see like this. I'm like, I like the
hmm.
movie aspect of it. That CGI shit doesn't mean anything. I know it's hype. You can
Mm.
hype, but throw some gameplay in there. Show me how it really looks.
There is some
Um,
gameplay in that trailer. They show some.
Yeah.
yeah, I didn't see that. So
It's not, like I said. There's nothing there that inspires me that this is going to be like. Although I will say one thing. There is one thing I did take away. The the combat in the dungeon video. I will say this: the AI for the NPCs, for the monsters, looks incredibly advanced. They're moving around the battlefield, they're dodging out of your attacks, they're backing up, they're doing lots of different abilities. It they even say in the video, the IGN video that I watched, they say this is one of the most action-based MMORPG combat systems we've ever played. And I definitely
Mm,
got that from that video, was that it looks heavily action, or like you're going to be moving around the combat field a lot because these mobs are going to be running away from you, dancing around your attacks. That
That's cool.
aspect of it, and he also said in the IGN video they didn't get to finish because their group wiped in the boss like 5 times in a row, and they couldn't actually complete it before their time to play the demo was up. So I was like,
mm,
well, that bodes well for in my mind if they've made it challenging enough that you're wiping over and over and over. So
yeah.
there are nuggets. There are nuggets in here for New World that make me intrigued.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm an MMORPG fan, so I'm gonna be hitting everything. I hit
sure.
so many games. Just, I mean, it might just grab me for a little bit, but I'll definitely spend my money on it. So
Yeah, I'm
it's
gonna
definitely.
wait. I'm not gonna pre-order it. I
Yeah.
will probably because now I've watched the videos and I'm intrigued. So now I'm going to do like I do with Ashes. I'm intrigued. So now I'm reading
Mm-hmm.
and I'm watching content creators who are doing content around the game, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm going, like when Ashes get closer and I can pick it up for $60, yeah. Or maybe I get intrigued enough that we're
Mm,
3 months out from beta, and I'm like, oh, I'll spend $150 or whatever it is to get me into beta, something like that. I'm kind of
yeah.
in the same boat with New World right now, where I'm looking at it going, okay, at the very least, you've set a launch date now of August 31st, which is a few months away. It's not that far away now. Um,
No.
it, you know, it's an MMORPG that is coming out within a reasonable time frame, and I'm not one of those people who have been like salivating over it for 4 years,
Right.
bitching about every little change that happens and everything else. I'm just kind of like sitting back and waiting until it goes live and see what I can see. Um, my
Well, yeah,
point of view.
Right.
I think the big thing is with dev cycles. If we go back to what
Yeah.
we,
Sorry.
we, we kind of separated a little bit on the dev cycle, but what we should probably think about is when when you have a dev cycle that is crowdfunded, it's different
Yes.
than a dev cycle
Yeah.
that is not. So
Definitely.
those two differentiate how pissed off your community is going to be and how angry they're going to be. They're going to be very what's the word I'm looking for? Very very action oriented by the 7 year mark. They're going to start screaming, "Where's my
Mm,
game?"
yeah.
So
Well,
I think
that milestone thing is what I come back to. Whether or not you're dealing with investors or a publisher, if the money is coming from outside, then there will be milestones, and you have to complete things by those milestones. And if you don't complete the objectives, you don't get paid. And if you don't get the
mm,
paycheck, then your people don't get paid. And so there is always going to be this necessity to get things, just get shit done.
Yeah.
Even in my day job, I have a very wide, without getting into too many details, I have a very wide I have flexibility in what I do with my day job in the marketing department for the travel company that I work for that travel publication. But I do have bonuses that are tied to milestones. And so, yeah, I get this amount of money for doing these things. But then if I want to get the bonuses, then I have to do these things by these dates. And that is somewhat similar to the way it works with investors and publishers. I've been self-employed since I was 21. I'm 41 now, so I've got 20 years of being self-employed on a lot of different projects. And traditionally, the way I've always done business is, unless it's a ongoing thing, you get 25% up front, 25 to 50% up front. I really like 50%. 50% up front means that it's going to be a really good working relationship. We're going to get along really well. Um, 50% up front, 25% at the halfway point, and 25% upon delivery of the final product. That is a very fair deal, because if I screw up in that those first 6 months or whatever the halfway point is, and we get to the halfway point, I don't get paid, unless I've completed all my objectives. And if I run late on that, then that's my fault. It's not the fault of the person who's paying me. That's on me. So from a developer standpoint, I'm a big fan, and with Saga, I tried to. The problem is that it's really hard to have milestones when you have people who are working on a volunteer status because you can't push them the same way
Mm,
you can a paid
yeah.
employee. Because a paid
Oh,
employee you can fire, if they don't toe the line. This sounds really brutal, so I apologize for those people
it's
who are
true
listening, but this
though.
is just the real world. If you don't perform in your day job, then you're gone because I can find someone else who's more reliable than you who can get the job done for the same amount of money, potentially less. So it's like, but when you've got people who are working on a volunteer status, it's really hard to hit milestones because people don't feel the same compulsion to make the milestones because they know they can't get fired because they're a volunteer. This is the downside to the volunteer indie project. And then, even if they are getting funded by crowdfunding, that's when you get into the other side of that equation, which is, well, we're getting money and people are happy with what we're doing. So, are they going to complain if we push it back 4 months? Let's see what happens. And if only 5 people complain out of 5,000, well, cool. We can do this now. And then you do it again, you do it again, you do it again, and then you have the Star Citizen scenario
Yeah.
or the Pantheon scenario where, you're pushing things back 2, 3, 4 years. Ah, man,
Damn.
get something out the door.
Yeah. When you're talking about pushing something back literally years, like several years, that's where
A
I'm.
few months is okay, but
Mhm.
Yeah.
um,
I mean, even with Ashes, like there was like a year because of they were working on the backend architecture for like their server stuff, the
Yeah.
code for
So
all that.
yeah.
That's whatever. But that was a year, and that was a year. That was pretty tough for people too. You think of like years though. It's like,
Yeah. So there's a point where you gotta just say, hey, you're bad at what you do. It's just brutal. It's brutal.
yeah,
And people shouldn't be funding things that that are moving those goalposts way out.
yeah,
So I think there's another factor where we need to vote with our wallets after a certain period of time. You shouldn't be saying, "Hey, well, I can get into a beta, closed beta now. How about
mm,
$500 or whatever it is." Just be that person that says, "Hey, this is how I vote. This is how I vote. What's right?
yeah.
My wallet. This is
Oh
how I vote."
man,
So if you guys do that, I think it's great. I think for me, I think just to go on with the funding issue again, is I
yeah,
think a mixture of a little crowdfunding with the pre-order store, like so you have a pre-order store just to get your game out there is great as long as you have something to showcase. The biggest thing is combinate that with publishers or something else. So you're not relying your whole game aspect on the back of your players because that's not fair to them. They're not testers.
this
They're
is
just people
something,
who play the game.
yeah, and this is where I call bullshit on Caspian with Chronicles of Illyria saying that, you know, well, I couldn't find a publisher. So
uh,
hang on a second because I know for a fact when I showed up at the Austin Game Conference and I got up on stage to present Saga of Lucemia at the end of 2017, we were 2 years in at that point. We had, uh, I've, even though the video's been pulled off of YouTube, I've got it on my hard drive. I've got all those videos. So my brother and I were recently looking at, because we were talking about timelines and stuff for our new product, and we were talking about the
mm,
Austin Game Conference and conferences in general. And we went back and looked at the video. I think it might have been like early access 7 or something like that. It was like the seventh one, the seventh early access alpha build we did. But we presented it, we had a 3-minute video, I think, that I presented on stage, um, and then got people in at the booth and people were playing the game. I know for a fact what I presented at the Austin Game Conference for our product was shit. It was shit in the grand scope of things. It was not we only had like 5 abilities in the game. We only had the starter city, the dungeon, and one zone. So it was very small, very simple. But it was still enough that just being on stage and presenting that game, we had half a dozen publishers who were talking to us over the course of that event, like Perfect Worlds, who do like Star Trek Online and etc.
Hmm.
Versus Eve, talked to Steve Escondante, I think is his name, from Versus Evil. Talked to Jack Emmert from Daybreak. Had some very good conversations about numbers and things of that nature with publishers. And I know for a fact that the only reason, yeah, push that button. The only reason that they weren't
Oh
able
man.
to do a publisher deal with Chronicles of Leary is because he refused to relinquish creative control, or he was just being too anal retentive about these are the things that must be in the game. Because everybody I talked to, and I also went and had conversations with Jagex and other companies over the years, THQ Nordic as an example, because one of our artists had a connection there because he had worked there. Um, all of those companies were happy to talk shop and negotiate. And if you're willing to negotiate and you're willing to, be flexible on things, there is always a deal to be made if you are willing to negotiate. And I can also say that in all of the deals that I discussed, not one of those deals did I have to give up control of my creative control or IP, other than with Jack Emmert from Daybreak. They were very much, we want to own your IP and tell you what to do with your IP, and I was like, yeah, that's not going to happen. But all the other company, it was all about, let's find a mutually beneficial financial working relationship where you guys do what you do best, we support you, but we get a cut of the profits, and it's
Hmm.
probably going to be a majority share of those profits. But hey, that's the trade-off. You want us to give you millions of dollars in funding, then you're going to give us the lion's share. And you know, uh, in retrospect, my push button was always, well, I don't want to do a cash shop. I want to do subscriptions. And looking back on that, knowing what I know now about how the industry has shifted since 2017, I would definitely have been willing to talk about hybrid options back then, because back then 2017 was a completely different world
Yeah,
compared to where we are now in 2021.
absolutely.
But I say that in the sense of dev cycles and stuff. Looking at Ashes of Creation saying they were out of money, and then he did the blog post about how we couldn't find a publisher, we couldn't do this. We
Chronicles of Lyria.
bullshit, bullshit.
Chronicles of Lyria.
I don't believe that you couldn't, because I went out there and found investors and publishers who were interested in our product, and we had a lot less to show. We didn't have a successful Kickstarter. We didn't have that polished, pre-designed awesome cloak walking through the snow. Like, we didn't have any of that, and we still had publishers and investors
Yeah.
interested in our product. So I've never believed that whole line about we couldn't find developers willing to work with us or
Hmm.
publishers willing to work with us, so we had to cancel the product. That's just bad management and bad. You spend all your money on stupid stuff as opposed to actually, developing a product.
Yeah.
Sorry, a little bit of a rant there.
He's right. I mean, even for
Yeah.
us, we've had tons of publishers wanting to work with us. So I don't get it. Even they were in a time period too where you could pretty much write your own check because there was no scams at the time. So I mean, I don't understand how they couldn't just you know pretty much do whatever they wanted with publishers. I think publisher would gladly get in bed with them, but they either they didn't have anything to showcase, or which was
Probably
a
that's part of the
possibility,
issue. Yeah.
or they didn't want to uh, give up some rights or some creative vision.
You have to be willing to be flexible. So I live in Mexico, and I say this to put this in the greater scope of this perspective of this conversation. The number one rule you learn when you live in Mexico is that, and if it doesn't have a barcode on it, it's up for negotiation. Everything is negotiable. Everything. Which is why I let my wife handle 95% of everything we do, because she's very good at she's Mexican. She grew up in the culture. I'm good at negotiating. My whole family is. I got that. I don't see eye to eye with my dad on a lot of things, but I did get the negotiation gene from him. My brother's really good at it too. In his business, negotiation is just something I've been doing for a very long time. You also have to do it if you're going to be a freelancer. I'm 20 years into freelancing, so it's a thing you do. But I swear to God, man, Mexicans take it to another level. And there's something to be learned from any culture or any business industry that relies upon negotiation, because if you're willing to be flexible and you're willing to negotiate on things, you can always find ways around things. And that's why I love the idea of, I think accountability is a big thing, and I honestly, I'm hoping and praying for some sort of government oversight out of all of these class action lawsuits and antitrust lawsuits
Mhm.
that are going on right now, because I really want crowdfunded companies to have their feet held to the fire. Um, because I don't think it's right that we have companies that are going beyond that 7 year timeline and still like dragging people along and saying, just give us a little bit more. Let's do another, I call them begathons. Let's do another begathon on stream on Twitch. Let's get another big streamer to come in and do 250,000 views, and let's raise another $60,000. That'll get us another 2 months down the road. Let's no, man. Like, there needs to be a cutoff point where enough's enough.
Yeah.
Like, you need to get something out the door, and if you're not capable of doing it on your own because you're a crappy project manager, then somebody needs to be cracking that whip to you and telling you, hey, no, 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 you need to, let's do this. Otherwise, there's fines and consequences. Regulation. There's nothing wrong with regulation. Um, I think we can
Right.
all agree that seatbelts save lives. That's it.
Right.
I mean, for the most part, if I'm not wrong, seatbelts are mandatory in every state. Excuse me, not to get political, but I think
Yeah.
that's one of those things where we can look at, regulation isn't always a bad thing. Um,
Right.
we're not
Right.
saving lives with game development, but hey, we're saving money.
Well, sometimes we are. I mean, I've heard games with operating tables on. You can have a virtual reality of an operation. So sometimes we're saving lives. So,
Have there
but
anybody? Go ahead, Jess.
yeah, I just wanted to say. I mean, that's pretty much it. 2.5 years, 7 years. I think you should shit out, get it off the tub or off the pot, and 10 years. Wow, what the heck, man? If everybody's funding you for after 10 years, just why would you ever release?
Well, that's the moving goalpost thing.
Uh,
Why release a product if you're always going to have people who are willing to help you fund the next stretch goal?
So, how much do you all feel like, and this is just a question, if you're like, yeah, I don't know, or I don't really want to comment, it's totally understandable. But I kind of wonder how much games in development, like specifically, I think of like Star Citizen, have contributed to like cultural or societal shifts in terms of like the gaming community.
Absolutely.
It's yeah, you know what I mean? Like it's like, damn, dude, that's really
I
done a
think
number, I feel like.
Well, I think everybody can look at them and say, well, they're the perfect example of why it works. So we want to mirror them
Yeah,
because they've raised, I don't know, $270 million by now. I'm gonna go look right now because you got me curious.
it's a lot.
Last time I knew it was 250 million. How much has Star Citizen raised?
There's a report on it
2021.
recently.
well, the good thing about them though is they have a product.
March 31st, it was over 350 million.
There it is.
So
So
there's a product there. Doesn't I mean I don't know how good it is. I've been in several tests, but I haven't been in recently. So I mean, if they can keep it going and make everybody happy, I mean,
well,
you
that's
could
the
do whatever
thing. Like,
you could do whatever you want with your money.
I,
But
yeah.
if you're keeping everybody happy and they're having fun with the game, I don't know.
This is
That's
where
just
I've been honest in the past. I've logged in. So I log in about once every 8 months to Star Citizen. I'll play for a couple days. Okay. It's less laggy than it was before. Cool. More UI elements, a little more polished. That's cool. Looking good. And I get their newsletters. And I got to say, every newsletter I get, I'm like, at the very least, you guys are showing me how the money is being spent. And you're showing
so
me all the forward progress that's being made. So I'm not one of those people who's, here's the thing, I'm not against. Like, I don't think that's a game that's never going to come out. I definitely think it will come out. But I
yep,
absolutely do think that they are abusing that that
Mm.
whole people are just going to keep giving us money because we have this unique project, so we might as well just keep trying to make it the most unique, badass thing we could ever possibly make. And I just look at that and go, just release something, and then your expansion 2 years down the road has all those cool additional features. That's how I
Yep.
feel about it.
Yeah. I mimic that same statement. I don't think it's a scam at all. They have a product. It's there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's out for debate how good it is, because they're not there yet. But hey, man, it's getting a close time where it's getting about time where you need to
Get to
put
it.
something out, man.
Like, because the last time I remember when they brought on the investors, they brought in these two guys for $50 million like 2 years ago. They joined the board of directors. They said, we're going to have the single player version. Squadron 42 is going to be out 2021, beginning of 2021. Oh, no, 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 no. That went way out the window within like 8 months of those new investors coming on board. It was like, oh no, now the next announcement was we're now getting rid of any sort of projected launch dates, and we're just not going to talk about that at all. They openly said, we're no longer going to talk about launch dates. We're just going to talk about what we're doing, and when it's ready, we'll launch it.
Yep.
Ah!
How convenient. So
Like, if you're an internally funded company like Blizzard, I totally get it if you want to spend 10 years behind the scenes developing a product. I mean, I think Blizzard's a good example of a company as an FYI. They have spent hundreds of millions of dollars and 5, 6, 7 years of development on projects that they have then thrown away because they decided that it wasn't going to work. It wasn't fun enough. It wasn't doing the things or the environment shifted, and so they realized it wasn't going to be as profitable as they wanted it to be. But at the very least, they've been willing to put in the dev time behind the scenes with with that money. I think Project Titan was one of those, if I'm not mistaken, and I think parts of that became Overwatch. Um, it was one of those things where it was like I think it was 7 years in, they threw that project away and said
Who
it's
did
just
it for a
not
while?
working. And then we're gonna let me go look at that now because I might be misquoting that.
I couldn't
Uh,
remember if Titan was like code for what ended up becoming Overwatch.
that's what I was saying. I think it was
Yeah.
parts of that became Overwatch.
Yeah, yeah. I remember that.
Speculation began in 2007, and its official cancellation was 2014. Um,
Oh, wow, 7 years, huh?
yeah, internally, about 40 members of the project used the developed assets to create a new game, which became Overwatch.
Got it. Okay. Nice.
That's 7 years, so they spent seven
Yeah.
years of development time, so tens of millions of dollars, and then said, this isn't working, throw it away. But then they were able to at least take a portion of the team and a portion of the assets, redo them, and come out with Overwatch. So at the very least, they were able to recoup their losses in the long run. But I look at that, that's a good example, I think, think about that. That's a 7 year dev cycle internally. And they were willing to spend because it's not, developers working at Blizzard don't work necessarily for cheap. Some of the entry level people are working for 60K, but you know, senior staff are making 150 grand a year, so they were willing to put at the time money into developing and then throw it all away and say this isn't working for us. No crowdfunded game is ever gonna. They're never. I've never seen a crowdfunded game take an idea and throw it away. Um, Maybe somebody else has. If any of you have, let me know. Comments below also. But I don't
Right.
know of any crowdfunded companies who have come out and publicly said, "Yeah, we're scrapping this because it's going to take too long to
yeah.
develop." Um,
So Shards Online.
okay.
Shards Online. It turned into Area. What is it? Legends of Area.
Okay.
What they did is they had a shard system where you could throw everybody. The first first idea was there's a shard system where you can have uh, realms that you could attach to the main realm. So you could actually develop your own realm, and it was your shard that could attach to the original content. And they scrapped that idea and made it just a regular MMORPG with Ultima vibes. So there have been a couple examples that they scrapped the idea and gave you something that you didn't want. So that's there too.
Mm.
I mean, it's an MMORPG, but it's not what it was pitched as.
Supposed to be, yeah. That's an interesting thing.
Uh,
So
but
It's
yeah,
tricky.
I think we're all in agreement. 5 to 7 years seems to be a good amount of dev
Hmm.
time for most games. And I think when we say
Hmm.
most games, I think we should better rephrase that and say 5 to 7 years for AAA games. Crowdfunded games or bootstrapped games, there might be some more flexibility, but I do think if you have taken money through crowdfunding or pre-orders, you need to be held to the same standards as a AAA studio in getting something out the door within a 5 to 7 year window,
Yeah.
even if it's not what you want it to be, because you can always make it better over time. There's no reason to go beyond 7 years. If you're not taking money from people, I don't think it matters because you can continue to just go until you've got it ready. Um, but that's a big undertaking. I know and we were talking about moving goalposts as well. I just want to touch on this really quickly because like my brother and I, we're doing this new thing now, and we were actually discussing the other night. Like we're shooting for a July 1st date for these prototypes we want to throw out there, a demo to give to people for free and have them get inspired by that. And I was looking at it going the other day, going, man, I think we need to push it back a month. And he was freaking out on me. Like, no, man, we're not pushing it back. I'll get it done, man. I'll just make it like, no way, man. We're not going to be like everybody else. We're not going to push our dates back. And I was like, yeah, but it's not really a date. We've talked about it, but it's like a soft internal, prototype. But
That's too funny.
he wants to get
he's
it done.
he wants to get it done because we said at the beginning of the year it was like, no, we're going to have these products out by the end, or products ready to be launched, ready to be published by the end of the year. And he's very adamant about that, which is great because it means that I don't have to worry about cracking the whip at somebody and saying, hey, we got to get this done because he's like me, he's a self-employed. He's got a cattle ranch and an excavation company, and so he's very much in the same
Yeah,
headspace of get shit done. Like come on, like and we don't even have customers. Like it's an eternal thing. It's a we want to get it out so that because we have our internal goals of like we want this done by July, this done by September, or this done by November, you know. And those were things that we set back in February. Um, but yeah.
yeah. Just think of it as that game development company is on your couch,
Yep.
and he's going to school, maybe a night school, and he's okay to sleep on your couch for a couple of nights. But if he's there too long, you got to kick him to the curb.
Yeah.
So
Get out, man.
get a job, dude. Uh,
Are there any
that's it.
really, just off the top of your heads, up above and beyond Chronicles of Valyria and like Star Citizen and Pantheon, are there any other really egregious cases of games that you think that they've just gone way beyond the acceptable dev cycle?
Mm. Dev cycle.
I mean, I mean, they either go to a no man's land. They kind of you don't hear anything about them, and you know they're a scam because they haven't updated the scam starter for months and months. Well, actually years. But there's some that are that come in my mind that I think they're a scam because they haven't updated the community. That'd be like Oath. Like
I literally just Googled Oath. That's literally the one I'm looking at in Google right
when
now.
they don't update you for a while, that's just like some of those things where yeah, it's probably not going to happen.
You
And
said you
it's
said scam starter, right?
yeah.
I just wanted to make sure I heard that right. I feel very proud to hear that word out loud.
That's a new that's a
I'm really
new
human being.
I think I got it from your show actually.
Yeah,
Yep.
I like scam starters and begathons are
Yes.
my two
Yep.
favorite like go-to phrases.
Scam.
Anytime I see a crowdfunded game where
Yeah.
they've got not a normal streamer, but they've got like a big streamer who's getting
Yeah.
like 25,000 views and it's like and I'm just like that's a begathon right there cuz if it was just about like getting the word about your game out, you would find people that fit, you know what I mean? Like not just working with the influencers that have the biggest numbers because you want sales. Like it just makes me laugh every time I see those. But the Begathon thing for me came from Shroud of the Avatar because you would see they would go on and they would be like,
Oh, really?
I'm gonna sell Richard Garriott's blood, and it was like that's just
Yeah.
that, That's a bangathon.
That's
That's
funny.
you're just looking for money at that point. When did Oath start development?
Ooh, that one
This
was
will be
like that one went up on Kickstarter. Or was it
2019.
20? Yeah, it was like
Oh,
a
so it
year,
hasn't.
couple years or something after Ashes was out. It was going to be the game I was going to play until Ashes came out, and I had some people in my community at the time that were like, "Hey, let's just hop in there." I was like, "All right, 50. I'll throw out 50 on it.
Yeah.
It's not too bad."
So they were talking about like the alpha like tw December 2019 or something crazy like that,
No,
and then
no,
it still hasn't happened yet.
no,
It's 2 years, and
no,
you're out of my radar anymore. You're not. I'm not going to talk about you anymore. I don't. Nobody go
yo.
check them out. Stop looking at them. They're out of they're just scam. Sorry, guy.
Yeah, I'm
You're in the
on that
scam.
Discord, and that guy Steven, the guy that Ready Up Studios or whatever, the
Mhm.
last post he made in that
Yeah,
Discord
dude.
was January of 2020, January
Yeah,
1st.
yeah.
That's
So
a year
that
and a half ago.
that company right there is another company that's making indie games like ours a bad name because everybody thinks you're a damn scam. Thanks, buddy. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, there was some research
So,
done around that too, to where like they went and looked into the people who had a company that were running Ready Up Studios and how they had another company beforehand, and then something kind of similar had
Oh,
happened, but there
this
wasn't a whole
I
lot of
just googled it really quick, and there's the
yeah,
first YouTube video that pops up. The guy's talking about there's a 43-page document that
yes,
someone wrote up about all the different things around. I'm like, I don't have the time to read it right now because I
no,
literally just googled it while we're doing this
right.
show.
but that's the big one that I think everybody looks to about scams right now. I mean, they didn't raise too much money either. I think it was like what 90K, maybe
Yeah, somewhere in that area. I
75,
forget.
90, something like that. I mean, it's a chunk of change, but in the grand scope of things, like Chronicles of Valyria, it's different. Um,
It still blows my mind how you can go through $8 million and not have a
no
Man.
prototype, not a
not have a
prototype.
prototype even. I mean, that makes me laugh. It makes me laugh in a sad way. It's just
Yeah,
that's bad
so
management.
ridiculous.
Um, well, thankfully, at the very least, we
Mhm.
do have some games that are holding true to the 5 to 7 year window. But I think
Mhm.
that at the end of the day, yeah, if you're beyond 7 years,
Albion Online, crowdfunded, Kickstarter, out the door. So
Yeah.
they're one of our success stories that we can be proud of for crowdfunding games.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I mean, even Shroud of the Avatar launched, not the best launch, not the most successful launch, but it is a product that, they raised, I think, around $12 million through the Kickstarter and then the private crowdfunding and equity crowdfunding they did after the fact. But it did launch. It's still alive to this day. It's not a game that I particularly enjoy, but it's there.
Yeah.
Same thing with Albion. I don't have any interest in that game, but I think at least we have a
Right.
couple of case studies that we can say, hey, at least a
Successful.
couple of crowdfunded MMORPGs have come out and released, even though it might have taken them a minute or two, but we're still on the fence. Um, I don't want to drag this out too long tonight, guys. We're an hour and a half in. Are there any games that we think we might be missing? But I think we've kind of covered everything. Um, because it seems to me like Ashes of Creation and New World are both within the 5 to 7 year frame, and as long I
Yeah.
feel like New World's actually coming out, so we can kind of say that one's good to go. Ashes,
Right.
I'm still kind of like looking at it going, as long as they don't keep pushing back
Yeah.
goalposts. I know I did see the
Yeah.
Lazy Peon did a very good video
He did.
recently where he
Yeah, he
said,
did.
"Hey, 18 months ago I was extremely skeptical about this game and thought it was a hoax." And he said, but then I'm watching what's coming out now, and I have to say that I really feel like this looks like a legitimate thing now.
Mm.
Um, so I think that as long as Ashes keeps, being forthwith about their information and doesn't push things back too much further, if they can launch next year, they'll be golden because they'll be in that
Yeah.
bracket of 6 to 7 years. Um, and it looks, again, I haven't played the game. You have, but from what I've seen of the most recent videos, if there's content to back up what I'm seeing in the videos, then I feel like they're on track. Um,
Wish I could. There's stuff I can't
I
confirm or
know,
deny.
I know,
I
I
wish I
know. It's
could. I
all
wish
good.
I could, but Ah,
it's looking good. So fingers crossed. And then we've
yeah.
got games like I know we had was this Dragon Cookie was on? Judah was with us last week talking about Two Kinds
Yeah, two
Online,
kinds online. Yep. Two
which
kinds online.
his game's based on an anime comic, I think,
A web comic. Yep.
web comic. And I think they're kind of like an open. They don't really have a. I
Mm,
don't think they have a timeline in place, do they?
No, no, they definitely don't. But they're definitely in there, just developing. Uh, I think there's some starter packages. I think they're doing the site crowdfunding. But yeah, check them out. So it's two kinds online. It's MMORPG in the anime furry type sphere.
It's
So
definitely niche. It's way
yeah,
niche, but
yeah.
they're doing it right. Like we had him on the show last week to talk about some stuff, and it's like a little two-man team. So they're not in a rush. It's very
Right.
much done in their spare time. They both have day jobs. They're not. I don't think they're doing a Kickstarter or anything like that. They just do some site crowdfunding, and it's basically just for people who are super into that like particular web comic.
Yeah.
So it's definitely it's not the same thing as say a crowdfunded game like Ashes where it's trying to appeal to hundreds of thousands,
Right.
if not millions of people. So I think there are good fringe examples that we can look at as well. But
Definitely.
but yeah, 5 to 7 years, folks. If you can't do it in 7 years, you're doing something wrong.
yeah. So
All
Five
right.
years is pretty good.
On that note, I would like to thank everybody for watching this episode. First thing you need to do is check all of the links below to these guys' various channels and pages and discords and websites and all the different places you can find them. Defend the Night obviously is an MMORPG, which we already mentioned, in development by Ninja Loot Games, and then Simurgh runs a lot of different. You do the Looking for More show. You do the Phoenix. What's the Ashens
Should I
podcast
should
you
I
do?
should I just give the list?
Yes,
Like I guess
yes,
officially.
yes.
It, when I think about doing
It's
this, I
too many
actually am
shit.
like, wow, this is a lot of stuff, dude.
Too many things.
Okay, so I do the Looking for More podcast, which is on Thursdays, 5 p.m. CDT on my Twitch channel, which is twitch.tv/Simurgh, Simurgh. That channel also
that
hosts
was
the Ashes
fast.
Pathfinder. I know, dude. Ashes Pathfinder podcast, which is Sundays 5 p.m. CDT, which is the Ashes of Creation podcast that I run. I do live stream on Twitch. I've got several YouTube channels. One's a variety gaming, kind of a gaming. It's called Simorg Gaming. The other one's just Simorg. Those are the main two. One's specific to Ashes, and the Simorg Gaming is specific to variety gaming, which I kind of rant about some of these types of things that we're talking about here, and it's kind of nice. I feel like it's my therapy, man.
It
It's
is.
good.
It's good therapy.
It
All right,
is.
so make sure you follow all these guys at all the various places we just talked about in the links below. Don't forget to hit the bell icon, subscribe to this channel, all those fun things. And we will see everybody in the next episode. So stay safe, stay healthy, and safe gaming,
Go
everybody.
long and prosper.
I can do it.
Paladins rule.
Paladins rock, yeah. That's right, Lexer. Just if you ever watch it.